So, Naj, welcome. Thank you for joining. Naj Austin is a entrepreneur, founder, CEO of Somewhere Good and Ethel's Club, which is a social and wellness platform centering people of color through community, arts, and culture. Probably a way better community manager and organizer than Dan and myself, so we have much to learn. She spent the last 5 years in the real estate and hospitality industries, building digital and physical products aimed at making the world a more equitable place. She was recently named to Inc.'s 100 Female Founders Transforming America's list. She's a HuffPost Cultural Shifter of 2020, Time Out New York's 2020 list of women making NYC better. And we are thrilled to have her in today to share more about her work centering people of color through intentional products. Thanks again for joining Design Driven. We're thrilled to have you here. And with that, I will toss it over to you to present, and I'll hop back on for Q&A after your session.
Perfect. Cool. So I'm going to share my screen and then we can get into it.
Dan and I will go off of video.
Okay, so I'm assuming that everyone can see. If not, this is the time to let me know before I start going into
good to me.
Great. So first I want to thank FirstMark for inviting me to be a part of this. I mentioned when we were chatting beforehand that this was a nice reprieve from my normal day-to-day, which is, being super heads down and building and talking to my team and customers and investors. And this was a cool chance to really think about a lot of the frameworks that I've been using without maybe even intentionally realizing it. So I got to put it all down and write some notes and thoughts. And so I'm really excited to share that with you today. And also thank you for everyone coming through today to this event. I know there's a lot of chaos and unknown in the world. So excited to be sharing space with you. So the title of this talk is If We Design It, We Will Come, Centering People of Color Through Intentional Products. As I've mentioned, building the two brands that I've built so far. One is Ethel's Club, a social and wellness club designed to center and celebrate people of color through community, arts, and culture. And our newest platform, which is called Somewhere Good, it is a social platform designed to center people of color through online experiences. So taking everything we've learned about Ethel's Club and really pushing it out on a global scale. I spent a lot of time thinking about this because, the things that I work towards and sort of what both brands encompass is this idea around building and designing for a new future, which, in terms of what we're doing is not the easiest path, right? We're saying we see this underserved audience and we believe that we can build something that makes them feel seen and heard and reflected. A little bit more about myself. I built Ethel's Club about a year ago, actually less than a year ago. We launched in November of 2019. And what I saw was a huge opportunity in the market to center and celebrate people of color in a variety of ways. We opened our clubhouse and, things were going great. We were having all these events. People were, again, being seen in physical spaces in ways that they had not been. We were only open for about 4 months before COVID happened, and we had to kind of quickly move into a digital platform, which, when I say quickly, it happened overnight on March 12th, which I feel like in a lot of people's calendars, a very specific day that the world sort of shifted. And a lot of building Ethel's Club was, new because I was a first-time founder, but also the way that I wanted to build it was outside of a lot of the frameworks that I had found. And so it was a lot of personal and internal research in terms of figuring out how to bring this brand to life in a way that, was outside of a predominantly white and male experience, which, we all tend to live within. What does that look like when you change that narrative? And so that is one of the big things that I think I follow as a guiding light, which is what does the world look like when it's built by Black and brown folks who are invested in each other's well-being and joy? So I feel like I should have this like tattooed on my forehead because it is how I make a lot of my business decisions. Everything about the product, from the name of it. It's named, Ethel's Club is named after my grandmother, who is a Black woman who did a lot in her community to foster safe spaces, to how we marketed the company on Instagram, to how we built the website, to our events, to the physical space. I mean, every aspect, we really looked at it through this lens. Does it evoke a sense of joy? Does it make people feel at peace? And so one of the design practices I use or product practices is through this same lens here. One of the biggest things that I found when getting started was to be really intentional about who we were building for and who was doing the building. So who was sitting at this table making the decisions about the design, about the website, about the narrative we were telling customers. In terms of the intention about who you're building, obviously we were building for people of color, but for people of color who were looking for something that they were not finding in their daily life, and how could we be an asset there? With the physical clubhouse, one of the big questions we got from investors was, okay, I get it, but how do you pull this idea and this essence of belonging into a physical space? Is it the colors? Is it art, furniture, books, plants, etc.? And so I had to really sit down and think about who am I building for, and what is the response I'm looking to evoke, for it to happen. And the word that kept coming back was reflection. And we took that word and really explored it in a lot of ways, where when you walk into the Ethel's clubhouse here in Brooklyn, the first thing the member sees is a mirror. They see themselves reflected because the beginning part of our user journey that we have drawn out is a sense of belonging, right? You feel reflected and seen. And so we literally went there with the mirror aspect. And I have some pictures of the clubhouse here. This is what you see upon walking in, but we wanted it to feel joyful, accessible, interesting, almost like every nook and cranny of the space allowed for you to have a sense of discovery and empowerment into your identity and who you are. Here's another photo, and we worked with a lot of different people, again, going back to the intentional angle, both located in Brooklyn and throughout the US, who identify as people of color and do really amazing, cool work. Here, we had the seats upholstered by a Black woman who lives in DC. The art in this space was curated by a selection of artisans of color throughout Brooklyn. And so, again, trying to infuse that spirit of I belong here in this space was intentional. And when we talked to a lot of members, once we opened doors, that was always the first feedback we heard. It feels so thoughtful. And we've taken that and really held on to it. And we use identity as a power source for a lot of the things that we do. In regards to the design you see here, when people have a takeaway, yes, it should be beautiful, but it should also always come back to the nugget of what Ethel's Club stands for, which is this idea of community as a radical practice, this idea of we are building into the future, we are building something new. Are you a part of it? Do you want to be a part of it? And here's another example of how we use the language in terms of everyday life. The four big pieces I found that speak back to the intentionality that we've had inside the clubhouse is accessibility, empowering, reflection, and again, does it bring joy? And so when we've made decisions, especially throughout COVID, where we were forced to operate from a reactionary standpoint, these are always the things that guided us. So when we had to sit down and think about, do we close the physical clubhouse, and then what do we do next? That is sort of how we found ourselves creating a digital membership, right? It was, we want to make this accessible. Obviously, making it online does that. We want to make it empowering. So we're going to have daily classes that center and celebrate the people that are there. We want to make it reflective. And so the practitioners we work with will be people of color in their different verticals and industries. And we always want to spark joy. And so as you think about product building, and I guess as I've thought about it, it's always been about these four parts here. I do a lot of reading. I'm a big learner, and I come back to three quotes. This is the first one I'm going to share with you today, but it has been a big part of my framework and guidance, again, in terms of how I lead and how I build. And so this first quote's from Toni Morrison. It's, if there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. A little on the nose, but I think it's really clear in the fact that, the world is vast. And I think when you are building things and designing things, there's this feeling of keeping it very precious and making it so that your head's down and it's in stealth mode, and there's this whole, story and a narrative around it. And I've pushed myself out of that to say, I want to see something in the world, and I'm going to create it, and I'm going to share it with my community and make it something much bigger than what exists in my mind. And as someone who is a builder by heart, it's become, so important for me to have that community to share things with. And I know someone had asked earlier in the Q&A around, how did it all begin, right? There's a lot of hype around Apple's Club, and we've had a lot of press and positive reviews. How did it all begin? And it frankly began because I, shouted it from the rooftops. I started an Instagram and said, I'm building this thing. Didn't totally know what it was, but we figured it out. And people were able to share in it. They were able to, again, see themselves reflected. It felt very intentional that it was not me doing it alone. They were part of the story. And so we began that user journey in that manner where the user was a part of our story before we even had a product, which I think is an important takeaway in terms of building. The second quote is a quote by Ruha Benjamin, which is move slower and empower people. And this goes against the usual narrative of move fast and break things, which I think in tech specifically, there's this idea that you have to be first to market to capture it all. And there's this, this sort of arbitrary rushedness, this sense of speed. And I push back against that almost daily in terms of really making sure that every decision we make, everything we put out in the world was intentionally crafted and thought about, from an Instagram post to an email to an event, with the goal of always empowering people. Does the end user feel like we've seen them in a much larger way? Yes, we are selling them on this item, but do they feel, that they are part of a bigger story, a bigger narrative? This is one I come back to a lot, should also have tattooed somewhere. And the third one is a quote by Simone Brown, and it is, I want a reduction of sadness, of debt racketeering, a world without prisons, without racism and sexism and anti-Blackness. And this is a big one for me because as a Black woman building towards a new future that, history has tried to stamp out many times, it sometimes feels daunting to want something that feels so impossible. But I implore both my team, which consists of, technologists, poets, artisans, designers, product people, etc., to push past that initial feeling of doubt and sort of the largeness of building a new future, and sort of sit in that and be okay with the fact that, yes, we are shooting for what feels like, is impossibility. But if we get it a little bit right, imagine what that world is like. Imagine what an intersectional future looks like and feels like to people who are so often left out of the narrative. And so this is what pushes me to, take the idea that we have a Slack channel where we have our wild ideas, and I often come back to those and I'm like, you know what, this is a wild idea, but no one's ever seen anything like this. And I think we should change that narrative. And so this is my fuel and my jet engine to continue pushing, to continue wanting more for people of color, and trying to create ways to make that happen. How can I give more independence, more agency, more joy, more everything, right? We're talking about an underserved audience that has been so left out of so many conversations. And so this is what keeps me going in terms of fixing the product, building it, coming back and scrapping it, and feeling okay to throw it away because we're moving slow, and empowering people to come back to this of saying, will what we're building make this future a reality? So I love this one, and I was excited to share it with you all. And this is a photo I come back to. This was my screensaver on my computer for a long time. And I think it's an important thing to point out, because as we all build in our separate silos and ways, whether we are designers or whatever the title or role that we hold is, I want people to think about what the future looks and feels like for you in terms of the things that you are building. Is it intersectional? Is it accessible? Who is there in this future world? I think about it a lot. I am always striving to, again, make things more accessible and reflect more people and more identities. And I think this is the biggest thing I see is still missing from, well, really almost every industry and vertical. But specifically, let's stick with sort of the tech and design world. I think it's missing there. And I think that, you know, the people who are crafting these new worlds that we live in, these new apps, these new platforms, are a little short-sighted in this manner. And I am happy to sort of take the helm and be the one place, you know, the one-stop shop for people of color. Totally happy to do that. But I also think people of color deserve options and we deserve choices. And I want every product to be a reflection of me and who I am and the people in my life. So the biggest things I wanted to share today were, you know, stepping back from the move fast, break things model and slowing down and being really intentional about the why and the who and the what for, you know, why are we doing this? And even with my team, we have a really clear vision and mission. We still have to step back sometimes because you do get stuck down in the mire of day-to-day tasks of what is the bigger goal here? You know, why have we all shown up on this, you know, all hands call at 9 a.m. on a Monday? What is the point of this? And so I want people to, you know, individually and collectively push back against all the things that we think of as true and decide, again, individually or collectively, you know, if we are building towards this new future, what does that look like? And how can I and or you make it so that it's a place that's truly for everyone? That's it. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm going to hop back on here.
Perfect.
Hopefully folks can see me. There we go. Great. Well, thank you so much, Naj. That was fantastic. I know we've got a bunch of questions in the chat and I have a few myself, but starting off, so one of the questions in the Q&A, and by all means, everyone watching, please use the Q&A, ask your questions. We've got Naj for, you know, a few more minutes here, so rare opportunity to ask her directly. Here's one from the Q&A. I'm sure you felt lost while building something that never existed. How did you keep going and figuring it out? Maybe also, you know, maybe tacked onto that, who do you look for inspiration?
Sure. Well, I mean, I have only been a founder for about a year. And so I am very much in the learning mode, which is why I wanted to attribute a lot of my frameworks to Black women who have been building things for a long time. I think to not get lost, it's important to have those almost like, you know, a mission or value statement that you can come back to and use as your basis for the why, right? It's easy to make a decision, red or yellow, pick one, but why did you choose that? And you have to explain to a team and investors and customers and paint that story. And so I think we have a really clear set of values within our companies that almost make it easy as to the yes or no, or the right or wrong, or the red or yellow. So I would, if that is something that you are struggling with, to the person who asked, I would sit down and come up with that framework and then use that as your guiding light.
Yeah, that's great. Just double clicking on values and you know, company missions and things of that nature. How do you implement those on a more like day-to-day tactical basis? Because a lot of companies have them up on their walls. You know, employees walk by them when they walk through the doors, but you know, they're not always tied directly to like daily action. So anything unique about how you guys incorporate them?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that so when we make decisions, so let's say if we're deciding about an event that we want to do within Ethel's club, we often give a why, whoever on the team is suggesting that thing, to almost remind us all again why we're all here, what we're working towards, and how this ties back to the brand and mission. So we try to like embed it throughout our daily life and practice. And look, I think everything can always be better. And obviously being remote makes it a little bit more difficult. But I try as the person leading the company to make that transparent when I make business decisions of, hey, I've decided to actually decline on that partnership we were talking about, and here is why, tying it back so that everyone understands this is why we're all here.
Yeah, that's great.
I try, not all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So Eric in the chat, in the Q&A has a great question. Where does your sense of hope and determination come from? What do you do day to day to keep it growing? And I'd love to also maybe hear a little bit more about the OG Ethel.
Yes. So the OG Ethel was a powerhouse in truly every sense of what that word could mean. She had the nicest house on the street with the most beautiful roses that she won awards for. In her house, there was a running joke in my family where if you stayed long enough, you'd see a wedding, a baby, a divorce, another wedding, a graduation. Like it's sort of where everything happened. And so I had a good understanding of what community meant and how one could be empowered by community in that fashion. And so when building Ethel's Club, a lot of what we thought about is how do we give that power to the user, which, I think when building products and the startups I've worked at in the past, it's very much how can the technology be the power source? And we're sort of flipping that and saying, how can the user be the power source and the technology just facilitate? Like you almost kind of forget it's there.
Right.
In regard to the hope and determination, I'm glad that you feel like I have both of those things. So hope is a discipline. I think you have to work at it. I actually was talking on Twitter about this with a friend where I used to keep a journal. And when I would come across something that would make me feel hopeful, and it could be as simple as like, a kindergarten class doing something that makes you go, oh, I'll look on TikTok. Right. I would write that down where I'm like, this is the future. And they're full of such positive energy.
Yeah, journal almost.
It's so easy to get mired down in all of the rest of the things. So I think about the future, right? I think about how what I'm building also can make things more hopeful for other people. I think it helps to build a company where people feel that. And our customers will tweet about it. They'll message us saying, Ethel's Club has transformed my life. And I'm like, transforms a strong word. But it's a reminder to keep going and that we're on to something. And so I think from a little bit of all those places, TikTok, our customers, and then just focusing, right? Trying to keep my eyes on the positive things.
Yeah, that's great. Another question from the Q&A. How do you see the future of Ethel's Club with the downfall or, restriction of other clubs and co-working spaces? I won't name them, but I think folks have a general sense of some of the other ones out there. Sure. This person that had worked at one of the other ones and saw them struggle with inclusivity. How do you make sure that you still have that inclusivity while still creating a safe space?
So we get this question a lot. And my answer has always been that I think it's really hard and somewhat impossible to try to backtrack and build an inclusivity. I think from day one, you have to have a really intersectional lens of trying to make it a product and or a team that speaks to as many people as possible. We have done a good job because it's been the first thing I've cared about before I even thought about, is it physical? Is it digital? What's inside of it exactly? What are the colors, branding? Before I got down to the logo, I thought about who was building this because I thought so much of that would reflect and speak into what the product was. And I think we've done a really good job of that so far.
Yeah, that's great. This is a really good one from David Gomez in Q&A. How do you measure the impact of your work?
How do I measure the impact? So I guess I'm not really measuring now. I'm still very much in build mode, but in 10 years, I would like to see members and or users of our platforms in spaces that they never dreamed they could be in because they were empowered by what we've given them. So the example I always give is I want to lazily turn on the Oscars and everyone on stage was an Ethel's Club member and I'm like, oh yeah, I know them. That is the world I want to build, where the things that we are seeing is a reflection back of the things that I've built. And so I think that is how I would like to measure it. So we'll see if I can make that happen.
Yeah, that's great. We've got some really great questions. So I appreciate you taking the time to answer these from folks. Another one from Maria. When you got started, did you already have people in mind that you knew were going to help you build this? Or did your team grow as your needs grew?
I had no idea of anything. I had no idea of the team.
Yeah.
And as I started to build, it became clearer as to who would be best to fulfill that role.
Mhm.
And as we've continued to grow over the last, 3 months during COVID, we've grown through members of Ethel's Club reaching out to me and saying, hey, I do this. I want to do this for your company. And I'm like, you know what? We could use a head of operations.
Yeah.
Like, everything's a mess over here. And so a lot of it has happened in that manner, but it's been very organic, and we've hired as we've grown. And we're in that stretch period of a startup where, it's silence and then there's a ton of noise. And so it's just trying to figure out your way through all the noise and signal as to what you actually need. But yes, we grew as our needs grew.
That's great. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about Somewhere Good.
Sure.
And
yeah.
how it relates to Ethel's Club, how it came about, kind of what the goal is there.
Yeah, so Somewhere Good is a digital platform meant to center people of color through online experiences. What we found with Ethel's Club is that we do holistic wellness really well. And we've, maintained such a positive relationship with our customers that they come to us for all of the things that they need help with in their life. And so I've effectively turned into Ask Naj, is the running joke on my team Slack channel, where a member will email me and they'll say like, hey, this is so great, I'm having a great time. Do you happen to know, a group for, POC dog owners in Brooklyn?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't, but
Right.
I'm sure I could figure it out. And so this happens so often that I thought there has to be a better way that is solved by technology and not me. And it should be a platform where creators, communities, and other leaders can put all of their goods and services and things on one platform, and then the audience that we've clearly tapped can easily find them, removing Naj from being the IRL Googler.
Scaling Naj. Gotcha.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Awesome. We've got time for maybe one or two more questions. So if you haven't asked one yet, toss it into the Q&A. I will ask one real quick here. If you could share one message with every community leader, community manager out there, what would it be?
That is a hard question. I'm like, let me pull up my
I like to throw the curveballs. Yeah.
Am I giving one piece of advice, you said?
Yeah, one piece of advice, one thing you wish was maybe in more communities.
I think that the biggest thing I'd say is to listen to, well, can I give two?
Yeah, you can give as many as you want.
Okay. So I think the biggest thing is to build your community before you even know what you need, because a lot of that will influence what you're building. When we started, I knew I wanted it to be a safe space. I knew roughly that it would be in Brooklyn. And those were the only parameters I gave myself. Outside of that, I started talking to people with the community, and I found that they really wanted, a place to meet wellness practitioners. They wanted a podcast studio. And so we incorporated all of that in. And so listening, I think, influenced the positivity of the product. The users come in and they're like, wow, this is exactly what I dreamed of. And I'm like, yes, you already told me. I just made it.
Right.
That's thing number one. And then I think thing number two is, as you continue to build, keep listening. I think it's really easy to be like, all right, thank you, user. You've given me what I've needed. But we've been able to iterate and grow so strongly because we use our community as a resource of feedback. And so don't be scared of them. They are your most precious resource that you have.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Naj, it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure for you to join us here at Design Driven. Thank you so much. Thanks for answering so many questions from myself and the audience. And all the best to you, Ethel's Club, Somewhere Good. And hopefully we'll all have a chance to connect live once this is all over. So
I would love that. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Round of applause. And I'm sure everyone in the webinar is applauding you as well. And Dan is back. Naj, I will unfortunately turn your video off and we're going to promote Raul. And we'll see you soon.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you, Naj. Thank you, Jack.